On the eve of the first round of Brazil's presidential election, the country's two leading polling institutes, Datafolha and IPEC, predicted a 14-point lead for Lula. But the final results painted a very different picture. Lula came out on top, but only 5 points ahead of incumbent Jair Bolsonaro. That discrepancy left experts and the Brazilian public suspicious about opinion polls and unsure about the outcome of today's runoff election. As well as flubbing the presidential election, major pollsters also missed the mark in state government races, particularly in São Paulo. Datafolha and IPEC have always been considered the standard for opinion polling in Brazil. They carry out in-person interviews, which are regarded by many as a more reliable method of assessing voter opinion. Phone and internet polls, often used by newer competitors, are thought to involuntarily overrepresent wealthier voters, who make up a minority of the Brazilian population. But this year's polling mistakes have rattled that notion. Media outlets that commission many of the polls have grilled these institutes, and the pro-Bolsonaro camp has gloated at their success. The pollsters' mispredictions were used by Bolsonaro to further discredit opinion polls. The president, who frequently says that he believes in the data people instead of the traditional pollsters, said that he beat the lie, and that research institutes were, quote, demoralized once and for all. The government's House Whip even submitted a bill that would criminalize the publication of opinion polls that contained mistakes. And one senator requested a congressional inquiry into the country's leading pollsters, and later the Justice Minister requested that the federal police investigate, quote, conduct akin to criminal activity by certain polling institutes. In recent interviews, the heads of IPEC and Datafolha attributed their mistakes to last-minute changes in voter preferences, especially at the state level. IPEC head Marcia Cavallari said that in São Paulo, 45% of the electorate, quote, couldn't name their candidate for governor without seeing a list first. A poll is not a prediction, it is a snapshot of a given moment. It doesn't measure voting behaviour, but rather voting intentions at any given moment. It doesn't bring absolute truths about election results, she said. A newer institute, Atlas Intel, which does its polling online, was actually one of the closest to the actual results. But it was still far off the mark in São Paulo, but Atlas did get the Bahia race correct, showing a 48-40 lead for candidate Jerônimo Rodrigues. The lowest turnout in 28 years may be another explanation, said Antonio Lavareda, who's the head of IPESP. Quote, unpredictable abstention would be enough to distance polling figures and official results. Indeed, abstention is believed to affect Lula's voters more, as lower income voters traditionally have lower turnout due to transport issues or because many of them work on election day. Marcelo Soares from data analysis company Lagom Data suggests other hypotheses. First, a non-response bias may have occurred, as Bolsonaro supporters are more likely to refuse to respond to pollsters, making the institutes less capable of capturing their votes. Secondly, last-minute changes may have actually happened, as the two front-running campaigns insisted on the need for tactical voting. And finally, Soares says that there may have been a, quote, pure lie, alleging that pro-Bolsonaro groups may have even lied when they were talking to pollsters. Two pollsters associations issued a statement saying that, quote, researchers from several companies have been the target of increasing and intimidating hostility while carrying out their jobs in different regions of the country. But are these reasons enough to explain why Brazil's pollsters missed the mark by so much? Back in 2018, polls had underestimated Bolsonaro's support in the first round, although their numbers proved largely correct in the runoff. Felipe Campante, an associate professor at Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies, says that, quote, there is a worldwide phenomenon of research having trouble capturing the degree of support for populist and extremist movements similar to Bolsonarism. But there is, however, a Brazilian component to this equation. The results of the surveys were sensitive to methodological assumptions, especially in relation to demographics. With Brazil without an updated census, income brackets are outdated, which may have influenced the results. Runoff polls still predict a Lula win, but the gap is now narrower. But will voters believe them? And will they get their predictions right?